Melissa, let's start this podcast off like this. What do dreams taste like?
Oh, cotton candy.
Cotton candy? Okay.
No, a dreamsicle. Why would they taste like anything else?
So then,
a dreamsicle is truth.
What does truth taste like?
I mean, they wouldn't have called it dreamsicle unless that was what a dream tasted like.
I mean, yeah, but does it have like a regular flavor or anything like that? I don't know. Whatever. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode 202 of the Whatnauts Captain's Log. My name is Kyle Springer, and I am joined by Melissa Wilkinson. Melissa, how are you?
I'm doing good. What's this question about?
Well,
do you have an answer? Do you have a take?
So every week here on the Captain's Log, we thirst for the taste of legend.
We do.
For right now, because I have Coca-Cola Dreamworld limited edition. I am curious as to what this tastes like. It's supposed to taste like dreams.
Oh well, there's orange and white on the can. The colors of a dreamsicle.
It is like a sky blue can, but then the design on it is almost this like MC Escher like minimalist drawing where there's these like doors or windows into other kind of portals or what have you.
Not upstairs.
One of those small cans, yeah. But it's a dream, so you can fly, right? Like you don't need stairs. But I wanted to taste this out. We picked this up the other day at the store, and I was like, "Why not? Let me at least see what this tastes like."
Are you there? Are you in the dream world?
We're dreaming now, baby. Here we go.
Oh yeah!
Dream big. Dreams taste like failure. No.
Oh, what?
I don't know what that tastes like, actually. It is a much subtler taste. It is kind of fruity. It's not creamy, though. Like, I expect a dreamsicle to be still a bit creamy. Like, does that make like a cream soda?
Yeah. You can have a cream soda.
I don't think this has that same cream kind of flavor as like a cream soda or a dreamsicle. It's almost some kind of berry.
We've done berry before. Wasn't Coke Starlight berry flavored, or was the bottle just purple?
I don't know. I don't think the bottle was purple. Was it?
Well, the bottle is clear. The bottle is clear. The Coke is Coke colored. I think the label was sort of like a purple cosmic image. So I thought it was berry flavored.
It's not necessarily berry. Like I can't put my finger on it, though. It is fruity of some kinds, but I don't know. So
some kind of fruit. The fruit you dream of.
Coca-Cola Dreamworld.
Okay, I'm going to look this up because you're not describing it to me in any way that I can figure it out with my mind mouth.
Oh, hey, this is the first thing that came up. I typed in the word Coke, and the first thing was Coke Dreamworld flavor. Let's see. This is August 17th. Tasteofhome.com. From Gail Cooper. What had any good dreams lately? Blah blah blah. No, I don't want notifications from Taste of Home. Go away.
How will you know what home tastes like?
Right. Coke's been releasing Coca-Cola Creations flavors all years, including Coca-Cola Starlight, which tastes like space. Spoiler: it's sweeter than Pixie Sticks milkshake. Oh, than a Pixie Stick milkshake. Is Dreamworld really dream flavor? What? So what? Do you have an answer here, Gail? Come on, Gail.
Faster, Gail. We're on a time clock here. I looked up Coke Starlight, and it is approximately raspberry flavored, I think. None of them just have, like, it's a whole article. I have to read several paragraphs. I'm like, just give it to me. One bullet point. What flavor is it?
Right. Yeah. I think Gail kind of says the same thing. It's a fruity aroma, but can't quite nail it down. This is not helping, Gail.
Ambiguously fruity.
Right. Sam is in the chat and wants to know, where's the Coca-Cola fandom wiki? There probably
it's got to be out there.
We'll
get to it someday. But after we read every article on the Mountain Dew fan wiki, then we will go to the Coke fan wiki.
I just happen to have this one here, so I was like, why not?
Let's open it. Let's open the day with a soda. Have a beverage.
Indeed. Melissa, we got a lot to talk about on today's episode. We don't have to go through all of the stuff that's on our notes. We can push some of that stuff to next week if we want to. Our main thing is that this week, or I guess over the past 2 weeks, though it was intended to be only 1 week, Melissa, you and I switched podcasts.
Yep.
This was an idea that you had a while back, and I was like, that's brilliant. Let's do it at some point. And then 2 weeks ago, I was like, let's do it. And then we had some technical difficulties to record last week, so we ended up skipping last week, all that stuff. But here we are right now to do that. Do you want to do that first, or do you want to save that for the end?
No, this is the meat of the episode. We've waited long enough, bud. Let's do it. Yeah.
Let's dive
right in. So I pitched you this idea because for two people who have hosted multiple podcasts together for over 4 years, we don't listen to any of the same podcasts. We both have a fondness for audio dramas, but when it comes to non-scripted content, I don't think we really listen to anything that's the same. So I suggested that we trade subscriptions for a week.
Yeah.
So we traded each other 3 episodes. You gave me an episode of Talking Comics and 2 episodes of Waypoint Radio because it releases twice a week. Mm-hmm. And I gave you Podcast The Ride, Blank Check, and Comedy Bang Bang.
Indeed. Yes. Yeah. This was an interesting one. So I have some notes that I took on my phone as I listened to them. Some observations and stuff like that. Just so, because I also listened to my regular slate. So
me too.
I don't know if I was going to say, like, I don't know if you initially thought of like, let's not listen to the ones. And so
I can't
back or anything.
I couldn't live without this stuff. This is this is my fuel. Like I don't know what a Sunday is unless I can listen to Blank Check. It's how I tell time.
I was the same way. I was like, I have to know what they're talking about on Waypoint Radio because I want the details. I want all those conversations. So I'll go first. I'll jump right in here to Podcast The Ride.
Yes.
This is one that you have mentioned multiple times that I've heard you say it. I always kind of make fun of the name, being like Podcast The Ride, the show, the podcast.
The animated series.
Right, yeah, the musical.
This is a comedy podcast about theme parks and theme park adjacent entertainment, such as restaurants and malls. And it has been one of my favorites for years. I am on, I joined their Patreon and then I joined the additional level of their Patreon. So I get a bonus episode every week. Can't live without it. And I went to see them live in Chicago in like late 2019.
Remember that. Yeah. So I took notes on all of these. I only listened to the one that you gave me, but the one that was out that week, it was them talking basically about their origins, like their theme park origin stories. Like, what is the thing, like when you were young, that like really stuck with you about some kind of theme park, or was there a certain ride or attraction that has like just been really, really memorable since your childhood? And I have to say that podcast was actually fantastic. It was great. I think it was a great one to jump in on, not knowing these people and stuff like that. Because it was like, hey, what was the first thing, right?
That worked out very conveniently that they're not talking about like a parking garage at Universal Studios. They're talking about, the episode is called, I think, The Parks That Made Us. And it's all their little regional theme parks from the towns they grew up in that, like, you know, maybe they go on vacations to like Disney World or Universal, but this is like the more common every couple months, every summer theme park exposure that made them into theme park people.
Right. Yeah. And it was actually really, really cool. I liked it a lot. I don't remember the host's name and which order they went in. I know Jason went second. That's the only one that I remember that he went. Jason, that was his name.
Yeah. I think it started with Mike in Chicago, Jason in Philadelphia, and then it ended with Scott in Southern California. I think that's how it went.
Well, the person that went first, their memorable thing was Pirates Cove. And they said that their favorite attraction at this thing, their favorite ride, wasn't even really a ride. It was this UFO attraction, which was a strange thing to see in a pirate themed like theme park, right? Of like, why is there a UFO thing here? But you go in and it's basically just a video. Is how he described it. It wasn't even like a cart thing that takes you through these things. It's just you go and sit down and watch a video. That was it. And for some reason, he loved it and just thought it was the greatest thing when he was a kid. It must have been one of those things that made it look like they were taking off in the thing, which in my mind then immediately went back to the Comedy Central show Review when he went on he went on the thing to like, I'm gonna go to space, and it's just screens that make it look like they're going there. God, is so funny though. But then he was talking all about the park and his experiences and memories. He mentioned eventually they got a Camelot expansion, so more of like a Knights of the Round Table kind of thing there. And then he also mentioned a party room nearby named Jumps and Jiggles. I thought that was really funny. So, there you go. Moving right along though, Jason, his theme park was Playland, which is in the Jersey City Boardwalk. They eventually renamed it to Playland's Castaway Cove, so it also had like a pirate themed thing, and they had a mascot. It was Captain Sebastian and his parrot Chief. So they had that. There was apparently a fire at this theme park in January of 2021, which completely damaged the park. They ruled it as faulty equipment. But he like in his deep dive to go learn, like I liked that one park that one day in his own research, he learned a lot about the park that he didn't know, which was that originally it was named Bingham's Kitty Rides or something like that, like Bingham's Kitty Rides. And that the hangar that a lot of this stuff was housed in was originally used in the 1939 World Fair.
Cool.
So there you go. That's Playland. Now, the weird thing for me is, as much as I enjoyed this podcast, I don't remember anything about the third stuff, and I didn't write anything down. Like it was one of those things of I was waiting to like, let me at least like take a note to like be like, oh, I thought this was funny or interesting or stuff like that. And not to say that like the person's description, like I was still super enjoying it, but I just never wrote anything in particular down for this last one. So
that Kyle, I didn't write down anything. You showed up here way more prepared than I did. And I got to tell you, Podcast The Ride is a show about unnecessary research. So, like, you are truly emulating the boys tonight. They've rubbed off on you.
There you go. So do you want to alternate between them, or do you want me to just?
Oh yes,
I have.
Oh my God, yes, we need to do that.
Blank check.
No, we need to do that because then we'll
for Comedy Bang Bang.
Oh, well, I would love for us to end with Comedy Bang Bang. Okay, sure. Let's end it with a bang.
Sure thing.
So you had me listen to. Let me go through both of my episodes of Waypoint Radio at once. Let's start there. So you had me listen to Waypoint Radio, which you had me listen to, or you suggested that I listen to before. You'd never like assigned it to me. But there's podcasters we know in common who were on this show. I think you like maybe like when Yellow Jackets first came out and we were watching it, you're like, oh, there's a really good discussion about that show on this. So I listened to that part of it.
Yeah. Yeah. I was gonna say, I don't know if I would recommend this podcast to you just in general, like you, Melissa, because I don't think it's exactly your speed, since it's mostly video game stuff, but they get into all sorts of things. And I think the two that you happen to listen to happen to be like atypical episodes for what they normally do on that. So that was interesting. But Waypoint Radio is my current favorite podcast. It is a video game podcast. A bunch of them are journalists, and they are very well articulated on a lot of stuff. In ways that I find it really fascinating to hear them talk about things that I don't understand what they're talking about. As you'll mention here in a sec, one of them was on Warhammer 40K. And you at first you messaged me, was like, I don't know if I'm going to listen to that one because it's about Warhammer 40K, and I don't think you're going to listen to that one.
Okay. Yeah, that was my idea. Like, I was not trying to weasel out of it. I just thought, I don't think Kyle would listen to this. Our assignment this week is to sort of behave the way the other person would behave. So I'm like, you would probably skip this, right? And then you're like, no, I listened to it. And I'm like, oh, dang, I got to listen to it now, too.
Thing is, I was in the same boat as you. I know nothing about Warhammer. I know nothing about Warhammer 40K at all, period. So to hear them talk about this stuff and just deep dive into all of that, I always just find it fascinating just to be able to hear them talk about something so passionately that they really enjoy. So yeah, there you go.
Yeah, there was a whole episode just about Warhammer 40K, which was a name I knew. I've been in comic book shops. I knew it was a tabletop role-playing game, though I couldn't tell you what the genre and flavor of the thing was. If you showed me a pile of images and told me to point to which one is Warhammer 40K, I couldn't. I just knew the name. So I had no idea it spun off into so many like books and video games.
Oh yeah.
No idea that this franchise was so expansive. So it was eye-opening in that regard. And I liked hearing all of them and their origin stories with how they found this thing. And one of them was like, we had a school assignment to like cut pictures out of magazines and make a collage. And some kid in my class had like a gaming catalog that he brought in. And it was the first time I saw anything and I had no idea what it was. And it was years before I learned that there was more things beyond just what was listed in that catalog.
Right.
So that was one episode, was the Warhammer one. And then the first one I listened to was an interview with Adam Adam Conover. Who are both people I've heard on comedy podcasts interviewed before. I've heard Adam Conover. Adam Conover is a solid guest. They talk mostly about the Warner Brothers Discovery merger, which I've had to hear like so many different podcasts cover over and over again. It is. But it's like, I can't be in this headspace for too long. It stresses me out. But they had a lot of fun other discussions. Like Apparently, then we dig into the games Adam's been playing recently and his recent obsession with CRT TVs. I loved that part of the conversation. That was really fun for me, about how he's into vintage, the vintage video games, like late 80s, early 90s video games, and how that stuff was designed for CRT televisions. Like, it's designed for that sort of blur and like halo you get with that pixelation. And when you play these games, even on the historic equipment, if you play them on a modern screen, it doesn't look the same. It doesn't look as it was intended to look. So there's apparently a huge market out there for these gaming enthusiasts that are trying to get really high quality like TVs and monitors of that time period. And he talks about how the best monitors to get are like production, like TV production monitors.
Yeah.
And we had to like
wild.
Get some back end deal with like some company that was closing that did like post production or something to get one of their monitors. Like, that's the best stuff. And I love that really specific search for something that's like no average person thinks about. And maybe you think, oh yeah, like the Zenith TV my parents had when I was a kid. If I could have that back again, that would be great. No, beyond that, we're going into like non-home consumer equipment to get the best possible like NES experience.
Yeah. The whole like comic book nerd collector stuff, like that extends into video games, that extends into like retro tech and stuff like that, for just these for weird reasons, for I like to play old video game reasons, for just all sorts of things most people don't even think about, which is really, really neat. But yeah, I really enjoyed both of the discussions about the HBO Max Discovery stuff, because I think a lot of podcasts really only like went into it in terms of like, oh no, they canceled Batgirl, they're probably gonna cancel a lot of our favorite things, boo-hoo, that's sad, and like that's it. But like, since these guys are journalists and have worked in that industry and stuff like that, they have a really, really nuanced discussion about like what is happening, who are the players, what does this mean, and a lot of the stuff that they talked about in that when it came out 2 weeks ago has now started to happen 2 or 3 weeks after, right? It's just like, man, yeah, they know how these things go. They were on the nose with that. And then in the Warhammer 40K thing, the thing that I think you wouldn't be aware of, but was interesting, is that I know that one of your favorite MCU properties is Guardians of the Galaxy, right? You're a big Guardians fan. One of the major writers of the Guardians comics, who I believe also helped to consult on the recent Guardians of the Galaxy video game, is Dan Abnett, who is also one of the like major Warhammer like lore writers. Like he has a wealth of knowledge on all that stuff. So he is one of the people that they mentioned in that podcast, and I was like, oh, I bet you Melissa won't make that connection.
I didn't. But thank you.
Yeah. So, that stuff is neat. I like the only similar thing I've gotten into, of course, is like I have those couple of Gundams that are right back there. And there's all those like Warhammer like mini figurines that you can paint and stuff like that. And I have no interest.
These are my nerd walls, where it's things that I like respect that people are into. I admire that they're into it. And like, if I had a person in my life who was into Warhammer, like if I went on a date with a guy, or like, I found out I'm at a Christmas party and I found out one of my cousins got really into it since last Christmas. Like if I had a personal stake in it to where I know somebody who's into it, I would be a little bit more open to learning more about it. But when it's like several guys who I don't know, who I just heard, I can't handle like a topic I don't know and hosts I don't know. So I listened to it and I got some interesting stuff out of it, but yeah, not for me. I got the sort of feeling that I get when you like talk about Gundams too hard. Like I just glaze over and I stare into the middle distance. But no, the main episode, I like the structure of it. I like that you've got this long, and I don't know how frequently they do interview episodes, but like there was this long, sprawling conversation that's both about a topic of the time and, you know, the personal things about the guest's life. I love the diversion into the CRT television. And then they ended the episode with a fun, like, question grab back. Like it's a well-structured and enjoyable show.
Yeah. Good stuff. Yeah, they don't, like the Warhammer deep dive, they had a number of guests on that one, so that's why that one was atypical. They don't usually do that, and I think on, like, I guess Patrick Klepek was on the HBO discussion. He was on that one, but yeah, it was just one of those things of like, you probably heard like one or two of them on there, but you probably heard just as many people who like aren't on the show normally on those ones. So it's interesting for sure.
And it takes me like maybe like 5 episodes of listening to a podcast to really hone in on like everybody's voices and like tell them apart as to, like, I know when a separate person is talking now, but just to remember, okay, that voice is this guy. And like, these are the, you know, he's the one who works this job and he likes these things. Like it takes me a while to settle into, okay, I'm getting to know these people. I couldn't do it in just 2 episodes.
For sure. Yeah. Blank Check.
Yes. Blank Check with Griffin and David, a podcast about directors' filmographies. Right now they're talking about early Stanley Kubrick.
Yeah. So Blank Check is one that I have heard just in general pop culture. It is probably one of the most recognizable, the most popular podcasts out there. But I've never. I'm happy
you've heard about it so many times from people besides me.
Oh yeah, no, that is a like big one. It is a very popular podcast indeed. Griffin Newman, of course, has made an appearance in one of the shows that we watched for the review show. He was in The Tick. And we got to cover that. The first time that besides watching The Tick, the first time that I ever actually heard him on a podcast, I believe he was on MinMax. The MinMax podcast, which would have been the one I would have given you if you had been like, yeah, can I not do the Warhammer 40K one? It is also a video game podcast, but he went on that one specifically because he is a huge fan of the Lego video games.
Yes.
And they're big fans of the Blank Check podcast on MinMax, or at least the host is, and was like, I want to get Griffin Newman on the show to talk about Lego podcast, like video games. And he did, and it was delightful. It was so entertaining.
I want to say there's a video game podcast called Get Played that I really like the host, so I'll listen to that sometimes when they've gotten interesting episodes. And they just had David Sims on, the other co-host of Blank Check, to talk about his video game history and to talk about the world of Tron.
There you go. Good stuff.
That's a fun one.
So this episode from Blank Check, they were talking about Stanley Kubrick, as you mentioned. I actually forget which movie they were talking about.
Oh,
because the interesting
this one was
the interesting thing about this show is that their conversation is so meandering, and it's not like it's not it's not just a review of like, we watched this and here's our thoughts and here's our review and this scene was good and the acting was bad and here's the end, right? They go like, the thing that I wrote down here is they go from Kubrick in general to just like talking about him, to their thoughts on method acting, to Scorsese, to Adam Sandler and Big Daddy, and so much more. But like, going into a podcast about I don't know if it was like The Shining or something.
No, you'd remember if it was The Shining. They were talking about The Killing, which is Kubrick's third movie, and I think it's his first like canonical movie. It's his first movie that he considers a real movie that he made.
Sure.
And the guest was Patton Oswalt.
Yeah, and like the thing is, like, I just wasn't expecting the conversation to go the places that it did and went to. Like, they almost could have not watched the movie and just had the conversation anyways, which I liked and I enjoyed a lot, and they had a lot of great things to say. And then, yes, as you briefly mentioned just a second ago, they did have a guest on the show, and it was Patton Oswalt, who is always just delightful.
Yep.
He's fantastic.
All-star.
Yeah. He's good in everything that he's in. He's just, man, he's a delight to watch on screen. He's a delight to follow on social media. He just seems like a good person.
Yeah. And it was a special treat to have him on Blank Check, because they mentioned he's the star of a movie they've previously covered on Blank Check. One of the directors they talked about a couple years ago was Brad Bird, maker of Ratatouille.
There you go. Indeed. That's all I kind of have to say on that one. It was kind of what I expected, of like, oh, they're watching all the movies of this director, and here's the conversation they have after they've watched this one, right? I enjoyed it a lot. I think it's fantastic. So
it's one of my favorites. I listen to every episode, even if I don't really know the director or the film at all. They play this game at the end of every episode called the box office game, where David will give Griffin the clues as to the top 5 movies in the box office the week that this movie was released, whether or not it actually placed in the top 5 in the box office.
Sure,
these limited clues. Griffin has to guess what it is. And I really like the angle of the show. I like the approach. There's podcasts that are about good movies, and there's podcasts that are about bad movies. And the scope of Blank Check is just all movies. And so frequently they're talking about these really mediocre, forgettable films and trying to and talking about the couple things about them that are worth remembering.
Yeah.
It's a really interesting. I've learned so much. I feel like I'm a much more thoughtful and knowledgeable film viewer since I've started listening to Blank Check.
Absolutely. My podcast start is kind of similar. I would listen to a podcast called Out of the Fridge. It's what we do on the review show. It's the exact same thing. But they only covered comics. And just week in and week out, I listened to that show religiously. Even if I hadn't read the book, or I've never heard of it, or I never planned on checking it out, I just was like, oh man, I like their I enjoy their discussions on all of that stuff. So I completely understand like, hey, even if I haven't seen the movie that they're talking about, still just checking it out and using that to hopefully further your own discussions on stuff like that. So cool. Good stuff.
I want to say also that when I was down in Oklahoma City visiting you, Sunday night, we'd had our final dinner. We'd said goodbye. I was going back to my hotel room to like relax and prepare to leave the next day. And I had a little bit of time to actually enjoy the hotel pool. And when I went down there, I was alone. Nobody else was there. And it was like later in the evening. It was like 8:00. I'm like, oh, if I'm alone, I'm going to play a podcast. So I listened to that day's new blank check, which was about Stanley Kubrick's like early films.
Sure.
And so I'm just floating around this Best Western pool alone at dusk, watching the sunset out the window, listening to them talk about early Kubrick films.
Amazing. Amazing.
It was very serene, very relaxing. Great way to cap off a vacation.
Indeed. Well, before we continue, let's take a quick break for some housekeeping. And when we come back, we will do the second half of these podcasts that we switched and traded. So we will be right back. We put a lot of hard work into the shows that we make. And yes, we make multiple different shows here at the Whatnauts. And we'd love it if you check them all out. You can find out more information on our website at thewhatnauts.com, as well as your favorite podcasting platform of choice. When you type in the Whatnauts, all of our shows will pop up right there. Just don't forget to give us a nice rating and review if you like the shows. If you want to support what we do here at the Whatnauts, patreon.com/thewhatnauts is the best place to do that. You can support us for as little as $1 a month. You can get all kinds of exclusive content at the $3 tier. You can also get a shout out and a thank you on all of our shows at the $5 tier. You can support us on Twitch by subscribing to our channel at twitch.tv/thewhatnauts. And we would love to have you all join us for our live streams and talk with us in the chat. And lastly, we have merch. If you'd like to grab yourself a shirt or a sweatshirt or a mug or something else, go to thewhatnauts.com/store to pick up some merch today. And we are back. A big shout out to all of our Patreon supporters. We thank you a lot. It means a ton to us. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Cool things
that
we have been up to. Gamescom has just started. This is a big video game convention held out in Germany every year. If I'm not mistaken, it is the largest one in the world. That got started this week. There's all kinds of presentations and showcases and new trailers and stuff like that. So we got to talk a bit about that on Crossplay this week. But it will be continuing, so you will hear more about it next week on Crossplay as well. So be on the lookout for that. On the review show this coming week, we are about to finish discussing Fringe, the fifth and final season. We've been watching that for the past couple months. It is a sci-fi TV show, very similar to the X-Files, but goes in a much different direction, and we have finally seen the fifth and final season, and that's what we will be talking about this weekend. But keep your eyes peeled, because in September we always do Shame-tember on the review show, in which we each take a week and pitch things that are on our list of shame. So first up on my list of shame, I have never seen the Godfather trilogy. I've never seen any of them. So that is one of the things that I pitched. That's the one you Melissa, picked.
Yeah,
because you have also
I haven't seen it either.
Yeah, so this worked out perfect. We will rectify our mistake of not having seen the Godfather trilogy, and we will start that at the start of September. So good fun with that. And of course, our reactions to She-Hulk, we recorded them just before we were recording this podcast. So our reactions to 1 and 2 will go up as one big podcast up on our YouTube page, as well as the Reactor Core feed. So there you go. You guys can get that as a podcast as well. But there you go. That's our housekeeping for this week. Let's get back to trading podcasts.
Yeah.
Podswap.
And first, Podswap. Operation Podswap. You also had me listen to Talking Comics, which is a general comic book discussion show. They talk about news. They all bring their what they've been reading lately to the table, and I really enjoyed this one.
Good,
this was a great conversation. There's a lot of stuff that went over my head, but there were other things that intrigued me enough that like I added stuff to my review show pitch list. Like, I'm going to check these things out. I got a lot out of this show.
Good stuff. Yeah, this is also kind of my comic book or like podcast origin. When I moved out, so I in college, I took a year off of school. I moved back in with my parents, but my parents had moved out to Texas at the time. So I moved out there to Texas with them for a year and some change. And I ended up in a job where I was working on a computer. I could have my headphones in, but I couldn't like goof around on the internet and check Facebook or Twitter or stuff like that. So podcasts was the way I could like keep up with news. And at the time, I was really only kind of aware of like Kevin Smith and his like nerdy podcasts. I liked his Fat Man on Batman podcast back in the day. Right now, I think he's still making that show. He's now making it with Mark Bernardin. I have to admit, I kind of lost interest in the show once they changed the format of no fault to Mark coming on the show, but it used to be an interview show where Kevin Smith would interview someone who has worked on some kind of Batman media, whether it be a movie or a TV show or a comic or a video game or something like that, and talk about their like Batman origin story of like, how did you discover Batman? Like, what does Batman mean to you? Like all of that stuff. And it was fantastic. And then they changed it up to be more of a like weekly comic book news show. And I was just like, all right, okay. But I was also like, well, yeah, I do want my weekly like comic book news. How do I get that if I can't go check comicvine.com or all that all that stuff? And so I searched around for comic book podcasts, and Talking Comics quickly became like this was the podcast that I listened to religiously, like the first one that I had that like every week I had to listen to that show. And the hosts have changed a number of times. New people have come on. Some of them have left. Some of the old ones have left. There is still some of them, the ones from back in the start. Some of them have changed. Steve Say, who was the host of the podcast, now he was one of the co-hosts back in the day. Bob Ryer, who was also on the one that you got to listen to, he's been there since the start, or since close to the start, I believe. I'm not sure when they all came on exactly. But last year, you and I also got to interview Stephanie Cook. She is a former host of that show. So it was nice when we got to talk to her and be like, I listened to you on Talking Comics. It was great.
And I got to hear of Stephanie for the first time. She was a delightful interview, and I really enjoy her new podcast, The Caper Cast, which is all about heist films.
Indeed. So yeah, Talking Comics. What was some of the stuff that interested you the most, or what was some of the stuff that you were just like, I have no idea what they're talking about here?
They talked about Webtoon, which I wasn't familiar with, but some of the titles they mentioned were very intriguing. I put them on my long list to go check out.
Yeah, that is a web comics app you can get on your phone or tablet. Not stuff that I'm super familiar with. I haven't checked it out, but there are a few of those apps that are very, very popular. And DC Comics especially has started to try and like, what if we put out a book on Webtoons? And what if we did this just to see, right? So they are exploring that format. And even on the like DC Universe Infinite and the Marvel Unlimited apps where you can read all of their comics, Marvel has these like Infinity comics where are ones that like continuously scroll
Oh,
up.
yeah.
So that's kind of what I imagine most of those webtoons are. It's ones you just scroll vertically. But I have not dived into that, but them kind of investigating webtoons is still a fairly recent thing for that podcast.
Okay. Yeah, well, maybe you want to check it out and maybe read one and see if it's possible pitch material in the future. I also liked hearing about Parker Girls, which is the new series from the author of Stranger in Paradise. That's Terry Moore, correct?
Correct, yes.
Yeah. We read Strangers in Paradise like in the first couple weeks of the review show. It's like over 4 years ago. I no longer remember specific details about Strangers in Paradise, but I remember that I really liked it. And I liked hearing about what this creator is up to now and like what this story could possibly turn into.
Indeed, yeah. He's a creator that is always like he writes and draws and inks all his own books, and then his wife is his publisher. Like she has a company to publish his stuff specifically. So they're a husband and wife team that put out their own stuff, and it's always just fantastic. Neat. The art is incredible. Yeah, good stuff. Good stuff from Terry Moore.
They also mentioned a series called Love Everlasting, which intrigued me because it seemed like it was a take on the classic, romance comics, the things that are blown up into Roy Lichtenstein paintings. Like, I never want to talk to Brad again.
Single tear.
It's right. Yeah, anything where a woman has like the back of her hand up to her forehead. That genre of comic.
Yes.
It's that, but it's got this sort of Twilight Zone-y twist where the characters find that they're like stuck there. Like they become aware of their surroundings. They become aware of the genre they're in. And they mentioned it was illustrated by, is it Elsa Chartier?
Chartier,
who we've encountered before, who just illustrated some issues of Starfire that we read a couple weeks ago. And from what I've seen of her artwork, she sounds like such a good match for that subject.
Absolutely.
So absolutely. I'm gonna look for that title in the future. Once some of these things like collect enough issues to be of pitch length, I want to come back to them.
That's the thing. That book just got started. Like issue 1 is out. Issue 2, I don't know when it's supposed. I don't know if it's out now or will be out this next month. But the guy that writes that is Tom King, who wrote The Vision.
Yes.
That we did with that. Yeah, we've done that on the show. He's one of my favorite creators. But that's one that I've had my eye on too. So lots of good stuff that they have on there. Lots of interesting. I read this book, and I read that book, and
I really liked that roundtable format. I like that they also had, again, like sort of a question and answer period where they're like, pineapple on pizza. How do we all feel?
That one to me was kind of an eye roll moment to me. It's like, I feel like Steve missed this years ago when this was like the big discussion thing and just discovered it now. Like, you guys were arguing about that? But yeah, it was still good, good fun. I
like the concept that they do like bring a question there that's not related to anything that they all get to weigh in on and have playful arguments about. But I'm out there on the dating apps. Every third guy has to tell you how he feels about pineapple on pizza.
Yep, indeed.
I still don't know enough about comics for me to listen to like a comic book podcast or watch a comic book show and like consistently feel like I know what they're talking about, to have enough knowledge that I'd stay engaged. But it was neat to listen to this and hear them mention so many creators that we have encountered before on the review show. Like, okay, I don't know a lot about comics, but I do know who Terry Moore is.
Yep. Indeed. Bob Ryer, like I know you said that it takes you a bit to suss out who's who on the show, so you won't be as familiar with him. Bob Ryer is fantastic. He's an older gentleman on the show, and God, his comic book knowledge is like he could be the archives for the She-Hulk like law firm that they just have all of these back issues, but he has been reading like the Fantastic Four since they got started basically. And like he is on this show week in and week out. Some of the creators who've written like Captain Marvel and all of these, like they know him, and like when they see him at cons, they're all just like, "Hey, Bob, it's great to see you." He's fantastic. He keeps up, like he's in step with these like much younger hosts.
That's good.
And yeah, he's absolutely a delight, and is just like I'm consistently just astounded in how much he knows of like, oh, it was this year, it was this issue, and they did this. And I'm just like, how? Oh my God, like how do you remember this stuff? This is amazing. So great show if you are a comic book fan or want to start getting into them, because that's also my advice for comics in general. Like sometimes the best thing to do is just jump in. Like you might not understand everything that's happening at the start, but you'll start to pick up enough so that when the next arc does start, you'll be like, okay, I feel like I know a bit and I can go from there, and you'll just build and build and build. And that's kind of the same thing with this show. Like it's a good one to follow week in and week out if you are interested in comics and learning more about them, because they will introduce you to new books, and they will talk about them in a way that could interest you or warn you from not picking it up or who knows what. But yeah, good show.
Nice. And finally, Comedy Bang Bang.
Comedy Bang Bang. So again, this is also like one of the biggest podcasts in the world. I had heard about this one from multiple sources. Never actually checked it out. I've not been super into like stand-up comedy or improv or stuff like that. So even just the concept of, okay, it's a comedy podcast. They sometimes bring on people to interview. Sometimes they have characters that these people are playing. There's kind of lore to this whole thing, but it's improv. But it's an interesting concept. I really enjoy the concept. It's not a show that I see myself getting into at all. In that sense,
it's a lot.
It can be a lot. I think, and I think this show, the one that I listened to specifically, was perfect timing because they had on Tatiana Maslany, who is the star of She-Hulk, and it was a lot of fun. They did kind of do an interview. It was fairly shallow, if I had to say,
which is normal. I will say that the interview portion is very jokey. Like sometimes it is a little bit more sincere, and the guest is always like on the same page as the host, Scott Aukerman, to sure. I know this is going to be like a shallow interview. You're going to give me these joke questions and you're going to joke off of what I'm saying. It's not there's interviews in it, but this is not an interview genre show.
Exactly. Yeah. So, because we listened to it, a week ago, and they mentioned something about Daredevil being in there, and they're like, I don't know if we're allowed to say if he's in the show. It's like, he's been in the trailer. The trailer has been out. So I don't know if this was a case of they recorded this a while back and
yes.
Okay.
Comedy Bang Bang has been on tour. The night before I drove down to Oklahoma City, I went to go see them live. I saw Scott Aukerman and Paul F. Tompkins and Dan Lippert and Carl Tart, and it was wonderful.
Perfect.
But yeah, so because they were doing this tour, they did it bank a lot of episodes a while ago.
Gotcha,
I've been able to tell that from what we've been listening to. Yeah,
that's what I figured, that it was something of just like, because they were cagey, and it was like, it's been out for weeks. Like, I don't know, like, you would think that they would know that Daredevil's in the trailer. But yeah, it was fun. It was interesting. It kind of went off the rails by the end.
They all do.
Yeah. Which I have to say lost me. Like, that's like, as it started to get more and more outrageous and ridiculous, as much as I was having fun with it, I was also checking out a little bit more and just being like, okay, there's really nothing of substance here. So it's still fun though. Like, that's a
there's
thing.
content. There's substance there if you're like me and you're a big improv dork.
Yes.
Like, there is an interview with Tatiana Maslany for like 15 minutes at the top of the show. And she's been on the show several times before. Her and her co-star Christian Brune from Orphan Black like listened to the show and their trailers. They really liked it. They've been on there before together.
She fit right in and was just like, I know what to do here. We're going to make voices. We're going to make jokes. We're going to have fun. Yeah, it's great.
And then Paul F. Tompkins comes on playing, he was Brock Lovett, the treasure hunter. Oh, no. That's who he played in this live show I went to go see. No, he plays a man named Obi-Wan Kenobi. And they're like, oh, Kenobi. Like the Star Wars character. And he's like, I don't know what that is. I don't own a TV. I've never seen Star Wars.
Yeah.
This show, the actors will come on playing these regular characters. Like, he's played Brock Lovett, Wet Treasure Hunter, like half a dozen times. And they build up the lore of Brock Lovett, Wet Treasure Hunter. But then he'll still come on and invent these entirely new characters that are just like, here's a silly name and like a really silly one sentence premise. I'm just going to go in there and I'm going to see what happens. With it.
Yeah. Which I,
right.
Like,
so
I think that's fantastic. Cause I like, even though I'm not super into the whole improv scene, like, man, if you hit the right buttons, it can be gold. It's just, goodness gracious. And like, I've been to a local improv show once in my life, and even that stuff, like these unknown people, just if they just get the right stuff, it can be gold. And yeah, I feel like the show, if you're on the fence, can kind of be exactly that. It's like, it's going to be hit or miss. Like, there might be some things in there that are just, God, this is great. Laugh out loud. You'll be in stitches. And then there's some stuff. It's just like, okay, this is getting a little ridiculous here, guys. Rein it in.
No, they're not allowed to rein it in. That's not what the show is about. It's not that kind of show. And then I want to say that the third guest, it's an improviser named Caitlin Riley, who I'm not sure if I've heard before. She comes on playing like this Hollywood starlet. This is very much like
coked out Hollywood.
Yeah, fully like the Judy Garland style.
Yeah, like 1950s at the
30s,
latest.
40s, 50s. Yeah. And she's just like this starlet who's there to promote her work, but she seems like entirely unstuck in time. And she's like, well, I haven't slept in 36 hours, but I'll tap dance for you if you want, sir. And they start unraveling her backstory and how she's like, they're like, I don't know if anything that this lady is saying is adding up. How old is she? Like, is she very old, or is she like a contemporary lady who's like, thinks she's a starlet from the 40s and she's there like looking for her mom, and
Tatiana
then at the end it turns out
being her mom, right? Like,
it is very, very silly, but that's what this show is. It is an interview that then dives off the rails, and there's frequently episodes that have no real people in them. It's just improv characters, and those are even more unhinged. There will be actors on there playing several characters at the same time, like Andy Daly from Review.
Mm-hmm.
He's been on the show for years. He's one of the all-stars. He has a litany of characters. So whenever he comes on, you are talking to like 10 different people who are weaving in and out of a story together.
And see, that I think is one of the most exquisite things about that show, right? Is that they do have this lore built up that is like the only record of it is go listen to the podcast, right?
Yeah.
Those actors have to remember what they said, or the hosts have to remind them in the midst of them doing improv. And it's most likely, instead of correcting them, it's just, how do we incorporate that, right? It's the yes and but like that is it's fantastic. I think that is one of my favorite things about another show that I am watching right now with my girlfriend called Nichijou. It's an anime. I think it's hilarious. It's a slice of life story about this town, these young kids in school. There's another character who's young, but she's also like a super smart scientist and has made a robot to take care of her. But it's just these stupid little sketches from around this town, and the interstitials between each skit is almost like a security cam footage, but it's not. It's just like, here's a still scene of a walkway by a bridge near a park, and it's just this like serene, like still life of this town. Maybe someone will walk into frame, but that's it, right? But these skits that they do just start out as maybe the most mundane things, like, oh, we have a quiz, and the teacher likes to draw these little pictures on the quizzes to help make it a little more entertaining and less daunting. And then the skit devolves into this, like, one of the students speaking up and be like, oh, I really like your drawings. Maybe I could do one next week. And then the teacher will be like, yes. But she says that within earshot of another student who actually does draw and is very, very good. So when this student that originally asks does their picture and it's really bad, she is like, I'm the artist, and it just starts to devolve into this contest of like, that's not a cool character, this is a cool character, and they do something like, I'll do the thing next, and it just goes on, and it's ridiculous, and it just devolves into this train wreck of just like, this is the stupidest thing I've ever seen. It's wild. And yeah, like that it reminds me of Comedy Bang Bang. And then just as you start to see these characters in these separate corners of this town, maybe you'll see one of them walk by in the background of a scene, and it's just like, oh, that, like, there's this connection here. Like, you start to feel like this the ins and outs of this town, and I'm sure with Comedy Bang Bang, it's like, this character, oh my god, he finally got to interact with this other fictional character in there. How crazy is that?
Yeah, I think they will talk about characters when the actors aren't there. Like, I think they mentioned Marjorie Kershaw, who is Jessica McKenna, playing this really hapless, like, national park ranger who always wants to go to, like, the big park. She's like, I want to work at Yellowstone. Oh boy, I hope I make it up to the big leagues like Yellowstone. And instead they keep sending her to like that's like, you were sent to the most obscure park way up in Alaska. You're sent to Dry Tortugas, which isn't a park. It's just like a historic fort in the Florida Keys. And I think she was last stationed at the St. Louis Arch. That is part of the National Park Service. And she was there like during COVID, where she's like, yeah, we've got the arch, but nobody can actually go up inside the little elevator to the top. You just look at it from the outside. Everywhere she goes, she's like, she never makes it up to the big leagues of Yellowstone. She keeps working on it. So yeah, the characters are, they're all so silly, but sometimes they're also really sincere, like Marjorie, where they do have some sort of a plight, and you do become fond of them. Like, I'm rooting for her. I hope she gets there.
Yeah.
If you are intrigued by Comedy Bang Bang, I think the backlogs are all behind a paywall. You can become like a member and get like access to the backlogs and like all of these different bonus episodes. I've really been meaning to do it. But at the end of every year, Scott Aukerman and Paul F. Tompkins host a best of, and they host it just as themselves. Like, they're not playing characters. Paul's not playing a character. This is the only time he appears on Comedy Bang Bang as himself, and they just talk as themselves, and they give you the behind the scenes info as, this is what was happening this day. These two guys came in. All they knew is that their characters were brothers, and then they figured the rest out on air. And they give you these good, solid, like 10-minute clips from like the top 15 episodes that the fans vote on at the end of the year. And I think those episodes always stay out of the paywall. Like, you can always go back and listen to those, I think.
It's an interesting way to do like a clip show kind of thing, which I know can be hit or miss with most people. I think it's a good thing to have for here's a best of and a bunch of behind the scenes info on all of that stuff, rather than just like, it's episode 500, here's a clip show so we could take the week off. Right. That's neat. I enjoyed it. I thought this was a lot of fun. The last observation that I want to make about all three shows, less about content on the shows, but just an interesting thing that like I feel kind of like slightly vindicated of like, yes, I knew that was a smart idea. One that I've not done on these shows. None of them were numbered. It's not like episode 592 of Comedy Bang Bang. It was just the one that was out. They only listed the title.
I can see some numbers in my podcast app, but yeah, it may vary depending on your app presentation. If you were curious, that was episode 770 of Comedy Bang Bang.
Yeah, it might be the app itself that is just keeping track of how many there are in there. But yeah, that was something I noticed and I've thought about for our podcast, and I decided to take them out in certain cases, or like put the episode number like in the description rather than stuff like that. Because I don't want the episode 700 to scare people off and be like, oh man, I have to go listen to 700 episodes to know what's happening here, which is most likely not the case, right? You can just jump in on that one and you'll probably be fine.
Like you can hear us talk about season 5 of Fringe, just knowing the previous 4 seasons of Fringe. You don't also need to know about when we watched The Leftovers.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. Or even like on the crossplay or here, like, yes, this is number 202, but you don't need to go listen to the other 201 to figure out like, so who is Melissa really?
We have very clearly defined characters, you and I.
Indeed.
It was interesting to hear the differences between the podcasts that we listen to. Like, I go for really comedic stuff, and Comedy Bang Bang is just pure nonsense. And like Podcast Ride I do learn a lot about theme parks. The Blank Check's been really enlightening about film. Like, they are informational podcasts, but they are also wacky. This Blank Check, since they had like a guest on, and it's like truly a guest and not like one of their friends who like is on the show like once a year or whatever, who they are more casual with, since it was like somebody new. It was a more like, it meandered, but it never went off the rails. The Blank Check can be such a silly show. You didn't even get to the parts where they name off all of the nicknames they have for their producer. Like, every time they do a new series, they give him a new nickname based on like the mini series. Like, his name is Ben Hosley, so like they'll God, I'd have to look
Ben
up now. Right. No, well, they've got all these. Exactly. It's stuff like that. Like there's a pun on his name for every different directorial series. So now it's been collecting and snowballing to where he's got like 30 nicknames. And like at least once, like every couple weeks or something, Griffin will insist on reading through every nickname that Pin has been collecting. Funny. Right. So that's like,
cool. That's good.
Like these are podcasts where I can learn things for real, but it's just real goofy company. And yours also had some element of that, but they were like news updates.
Yes.
These were things that seemed like you listened to like fill you in on the world.
So that's the thing about Waypoint Radio is that, like I said, you listen to that were a little more atypical. But that is also something I go to Waypoint Radio for, is just to hear like the weird anecdotal comedic stories about their lives, or the way they think when they ask like, yeah, do you like pineapple on pizza? Like that, like when Rob Zachney gets really into like, oh, should I get into like making my own coffee to the point where like I'm buying mineral deposits and stuff like that, and like talks about that on the show and the research he's put into that stuff. And then just to hear the other hosts just be like, oh no, Rob, like you can't spend that much money just for a single cup of coffee. And then just to see how those stories progress of like a month down the road. So when he's like, so I bought the minerals for this thing, but here's what happened.
Yes, I love this stuff.
Like, yeah, that is that is one of the things that like keeps me coming back to that show, because it's so good. It's so funny. And yeah, it does kind of like build up this lore and these characters that are in there. So yeah.
That's why I am on 2 tiers of the podcast The Ride Patreon. I need to hear everything that these guys record, because they're like such well-defined characters. They've all got their traits. Like Jason is the treat boy. Like he eats all of this junk food, and once he made a comment about how he wasn't feeling well one day, and he's like, oh, this is because I had a banana when I woke up. And the other guys keep razzing him like,
exactly what I was thinking. It's like, oh, he must have had a salad or something.
Exactly. They're like, a banana? Your stomach can't handle a banana first thing in the morning? And he's like, well, I can have it if I've got like something else in there. But yeah, I can't have just a banana. And they're like, Jason, you eat like a hot dog every day. Right? And like Mike is really into action figures, and he's always talking about getting like the deals on action figures and how there'll be like a limited pre-sale that he's like, they're like, he has to like do it like the second it's available to get this limited edition Leonardo from the Ninja Turtles.
Here, Mike, let me say here, I have my Street Shark action figures. I have Power Rangers action figures still in the box. All of that stuff. Feel like
you I know you don't know a lot about theme parks, but you could learn. I feel like you would vibe with the podcast, The Ride Boys.
I do have to say that I think of the 3, that one was the one that is, I think, one that I would listen to, even though I'm not really into theme parks. Like that just seems like seems like we would all get along.
Right. Yes. I met all 3 of those guys in person. I have photos of the 3 of them. They're so nice.
That's cool. That's good.
I'm really happy that they're there for me twice a week now even if they take a week off on the main feed, like maybe there'll be a Patreon episode, or I can go back and listen to an episode from like 4 years ago. Like, even the most mundane stuff. Like, yeah, I do want to listen to them and Nick Weiger talk about a parking garage. I'd love that.
For sure. Well, we have no parking garages to talk about. So I say we wrap up the show right there.
Yeah. This was a good discussion. I'm happy we tried this experiment.
It was. I thought it was fantastic. There's a bunch of pop culture news that I guess we will discuss next week. We will do some catch up on all of that stuff. But yeah, this has been a good one. This has been a fun one. I'm glad we got to do this. Melissa, where can the people find you on the internet?
You can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Wilkywit. That's WILKYWIT. And listen to my other podcast, Saturday Morning Obscurities. This is a show I do with my brother Jams where we talk about weird old kid shows you feel like only you remember.
Indeed.
Again, it's something where I guess you can learn, but mostly it's just very silly.
Exactly. Good fun. You guys can find me at Yo Kyle Springer. If you want to stay up to date with all the stuff that we do at the Whatnauts, we are at the Whatnauts on Twitter. Go like, share, subscribe, do all of that stuff. That would help us out a ton. Maybe go share this. Go switch our podcast with someone else that you know.
Yes.
That'd be fun. This has been number 202 of the Captain's Log.